The ship was dying. Ambassador Thylus knew this the same way she knew her own heartbeat. She could feel it in the cold air that leaked through the broken walls. She could hear it in the groaning metal that cried out with every small movement. The Gentle Dawn had been a beautiful ship once. Now it was a tomb waiting to close. Thylus stood at the center of the command bridge, her 4 thin arms wrapped around herself for warmth. Her pale blue skin had turned gray from the cold and from fear. Around her, the remaining crew worked in silence. They checked systems that no longer worked. They watched screens that showed only bad news. Nobody spoke because there was nothing good to say. The attack had come without warning 3 days ago. The pirate ships had appeared from behind the dead star like ghosts. Their weapons had torn through the Gentle Dawn before anyone could react. The research vessel had no real defenses. It was built for science, not for war. The pirates knew this. They always knew which ships to hunt. 17 holes in the hull. That was the count now. Emergency shields covered most of them, but the shields were failing. Power was running out. The engines were dead. Life support would last maybe 2 more days if they were lucky. Thylus looked at the crew around her. 42 scientists who had dedicated their lives to studying the stars. 12 diplomats who had joined the mission to observe the dying star. And in the lower deck, in the cryo nursery, there were children. 23 young ones in frozen sleep, being transported to a new colony world. The pirates had not boarded yet. They were waiting. Thylus had seen this behavior before in the reports. Pirates were patient hunters. They would circle a wounded ship like this, waiting for the shields to fall completely, waiting for the crew to grow weak from hunger and cold and despair. Then they would come aboard and take everything of value. The equipment, the supplies, the people. Some species paid well for slaves. "Ambassador," said Communications Officer Venn, his voice barely above a whisper. "I have tried all frequencies again. No response from the Council fleet. No response from the Confederacy. No response from anyone." Thylus closed her large, dark eyes. She had expected this, but it still hurt to hear. The Galactic Council was supposed to protect ships like theirs. That was the promise they made to all member species. Pay your taxes, follow the rules, and the Council will keep you safe. But the Council fleet was apparently busy with other matters. The Rix Confederacy claimed this sector was not their responsibility. The Valorian hegemony had not even bothered to respond to the distress calls. "Keep trying," Thylus said. Though she knew it was pointless, she walked slowly to the main viewing window. Outside, she could see 2 of the pirate ships. They were ugly vessels, covered in stolen parts and painted with symbols of death. They moved in slow circles around the Gentle Dawn like predators around wounded prey. On the bridge behind her, a young scientist named Kira began to cry. The sound was soft at first, then grew louder. Nobody told her to stop. What was the point? They were all thinking the same thing. They were all feeling the same fear. Thylus thought about her family back home, her partner, her own children, now grown. She had sent them a message when the attack first happened, telling them she loved them. She did not know if the message had reached them before the communications. A ray was damaged. She thought about the children in the cryo nursery. They did not know what was happening. They slept in frozen peace while death circled outside. In some ways, they were the lucky ones. They would not feel the fear. They would not know the waiting. The hours passed slowly. The temperature dropped further. Some of the crew wrapped themselves in emergency blankets. Others huddled together for warmth. The lights flickered and dimmed as power continued to fade. On the second day of waiting, Officer Venn came to Thylus with a strange look on his face. "Ambassador, there is one more frequency we could try." Thylus looked at him. "We have tried every frequency in the standard range." "Not every frequency." Ven's voice dropped even lower. "There's Channel Zero." The bridge went silent. Everyone knew what Channel Zero was. It was the forbidden frequency, the blacklisted band. The Council had ordered all civilized species to never broadcast on that channel. It reached into the quarantine zone, the sealed sector of space where the Council kept the dangerous species locked away. The Deathworlders. Thylas had heard stories about them. Everyone had. They came from hell planets, worlds so violent and dangerous that no normal species could survive there. They evolved not through cooperation, but through endless war. They were strong beyond reason, aggressive beyond control, and completely unpredictable. The Council had decided long ago that such species could not be trusted. They were too dangerous to allow into civilized space. So they were quarantined, locked away in their own sectors, forbidden from contact with the greater galaxy. "The Council would punish us severely," Thylas said. Ven laughed bitterly. "Ambassador, the pirates will kill us in 2 days. What punishment could be worse?" Thylas looked around the bridge. She saw the fear in every face. She saw the exhaustion and the despair. She saw people who had given up hope, and then she looked at the door that led to the lower decks, where 23 children slept in frozen innocence. "Do it," she said. Achan moved to his console. His hand shook as he adjusted the equipment. The other crew members watched in silence. Some looked terrified. Others looked like they were seeing the last desperate act of a dying animal. The broadcast was simple. A standard distress call, coordinates, number of survivors, nature of the emergency. It went out into the void on the forbidden frequency, carrying their cry for help into the darkness. Then they waited. The pirates continued their slow circles. The temperature continued to drop. The lights continued to dim. Nothing changed. Nothing happened. Thylas stood at the window and watched the stars. She had called the monsters. She had broken the greatest law of civilized space. And now all she could do was wait to see what answered. Somewhere in the cold depths of the void, the signal traveled onward. It passed dead stars and empty planets. It crossed the invisible border into forbidden space. It reached the quarantine zone, and something heard it in the darkness. In the sector that civilized species feared to even name, lights began to flicker on. Engines began to warm. Voices began to speak in sharp, strange languages. The Deathworlders had received the call, and they were already moving. Admiral Chen Wei-Lin was losing at chess again. This was not unusual. Her executive officer, Commander David Assay, had beaten her in 37 games straight. She kept playing anyway. The game helped her think. They sat in the officers' lounge aboard the UEN carrier Defiance, the largest warship in the Third Fleet. Outside the windows, the blue-green curve of Earth hung in the darkness like a precious jewel. It was beautiful, their home world. It was also, according to the rest of the galaxy, one of the most terrifying places in existence. A death world. Chan moved her knight and immediately saw her mistake. Assay smiled and reached for his bishop. Before he could make his move, the emergency alarm began to sound. Red lights flashed. A sharp voice came over the speakers. Admiral Chun to the bridge. Priority signal on Channel 0. Repeat. Priority signal on Channel 0. Chun and Assay looked at each other. Channel 0. The old emergency frequency that the Galactic Council had blacklisted decades ago. Nobody used it anymore. Nobody was supposed to use it. They ran. The bridge of the Defiance was controlled chaos when they arrived. Officers worked at their stations with quick, focused movements. On the main screen, a signal analysis played on repeat. The message was broken and full of static, but the meaning was clear. Distress call. Research vessel. Under pirate attack. Shields failing. Many civilians aboard, including children. Please help. Please dot the coordinates appear below the message. Chun studied them and felt her jaw tighten. The location was deep in council space, far beyond the borders of the quarantine zone. Humanity was forbidden from entering that region. The council had made this very clear when they locked humanity away 50 years ago. Can we confirm the source? Chun asked. Lieutenant Park, the communications officer, nodded. It is genuine, Admiral. The signal signature matches Valori technology. They are a peaceful species. Scientists mostly. No military. What is the Council fleet doing? Park checked her screens. Nothing, Admiral. We intercepted their communications. They are still debating whether the rescue falls under proper jurisdiction. The Rix Confederacy has refused to respond. The Valorians have not acknowledged the distress call at all. Chun stood very still. She thought about the message. Civilians, children, pirates circling like hungry wolves, and the great civilized powers of the galaxy doing nothing while innocent people waited to die. How long until the pirates attack? She asked. Based on standard patterns, maybe 2 days. Maybe less. Commander Asay stepped closer to Chun. He spoke quietly so only she could hear. Admiral, if we cross into Council space, it will be considered an act of war. They will use it as an excuse to tighten the quarantine. Maybe worse. Chun knew he was right. The Council feared humanity more than almost anything else in the galaxy. They saw humans as dangerous animals that needed to be contained. Any excuse to increase restrictions would be welcomed. But Chun also knew something else. She knew what it felt like to hear a cry for help. She knew the weight of that responsibility. And she knew that she could not stand here, safe and comfortable, while children died in the cold darkness of space. How many ships can we gather in 6 hours? She asked. Jose's eyes widened. Admiral, you cannot be serious. How many? Asay looked at her for a long moment. Then he turned to the tactical display. 15 combat ships ready for immediate action. The Defiance, 4 destroyers, 6 frigates, 4 support vessels. Full crews. Full weapons. That will do. Chun turned to face the bridge crew. They were all watching her. They all knew what she was about to do. Ladies and gentlemen, we have received a distress call from civilians under attack. The proper authorities have chosen not to respond. I am choosing differently. She paused to let that sink in. I will not order anyone to follow me. This mission is strictly volunteer. Anyone who wishes to remain behind will not be judged. But I am taking this ship into Council space, and I am going to answer that call. Who is with me? For a moment, nobody moved. Then Lieutenant Park stood up from her station. I volunteer, Admiral. One by one, every officer on the bridge stood. Every single one. Chun felt something warm spread through her chest. Pride. Love. These were her people, her species. Born on a world where everything tried to kill them, they had learned to fight and survive and never give up. But they had also learned something else. They had learned to protect each other. They had learned that the strong must defend the weak. The Council called them monsters. The galaxy called them Deathworlders. But Chun knew the truth. Humans were not monsters. They were guardians. The orders went out within the hour. 15 ships powered up their engines and moved into formation around the Defiance. They were warships, built for combat, designed with the brutal efficiency that characterized all human engineering. Their hulls were thick and heavy, made to survive in Earth's crushing gravity. Their weapons were powerful and direct. There was nothing elegant about them. As the fleet prepared to jump to faster-than-light speed, Chun stood at the main window of the bridge. She looked back at Earth one more time. Somewhere down there, billions of people went about their lives without knowing what was happening. They would find out soon enough. When the Council learned of this, there would be consequences. But that was a problem for later. "Admiral," Lieutenant Park said, "all ships report ready. FTL drives charged. Coordinates locked." Chun took a deep breath. She thought about the Valori on that dying ship. She thought about the children in their cryopods. She thought about the pirates waiting to tear them apart. "Take us in," she said. The stars stretched and blurred. The fleet jumped into forbidden space, crossing the invisible border that separated humanity from the rest of the galaxy. They were breaking every law, violating every treaty, doing exactly what the Council had always feared they would do. They were coming, and nothing in the galaxy was going to stop them. In the cold void around the gentle dawn, the pirates continued their patient circling. They did not know what was coming. They had never faced humans before. They had heard the stories, of course, the tales of the terrible Deathworlders locked away in their quarantine zone. But stories were just stories. They would learn the truth soon enough. The pirates saw the human fleet before they understood what they were seeing. One moment, the space around the dying Valori ship was empty except for their own vessels. The next moment, 15 shapes exploded out of faster-than-light travel in perfect formation. The pirate captain, a creature called Voss, who had survived 30 years of raiding, stared at his screens in confusion. The ships that had arrived were unlike anything he had seen before. They were dark and angular, built with hard edges and thick armor. They looked less like spaceships and more like weapons themselves. "What is that?" Voss demanded. "Who are they?" His sensor officer worked frantically at his console. When the answer came, his voice was small and afraid. "Captain, the ship signatures. They match quarantine zone profiles. They are human." Voss felt cold fear wash through his body. Humans, Deathworlders, the monsters from the Hell Planet. He had heard the stories. Everyone had heard the stories. But humans never left their quarantine zone. They were not allowed to leave. The Council had forbidden it. "Open fire," Voss ordered. "All ships, open fire now." The pirate fleet turned their weapons on the newcomers. Energy beams and projectiles streaked across the void toward the human ships. It was an impressive display of firepower, enough to destroy a dozen Valori vessels. The human ships did not even slow down. Voss watched in horror as his weapons' fire splashed against the human armor and did nothing. The shots that would have torn through any civilized ship simply bounced away like rain against stone. The human vessels continued their approach without any sign of damage. Then the humans fired back. The first pirate ship exploded in a ball of orange flame. The second followed a moment later. The human weapons were brutal and efficient, designed not to disable, but to destroy completely. In less than 1 minute, 4 pirate vessels were reduced to drifting debris. Voss screamed orders at his crew. "Retreat. Fall back. Run away." But it was too late. The human ships were faster than anything he had ever seen. They moved with a speed and coordination that seemed impossible. Before his fleet could escape, the humans had surrounded them. Aboard the Gentle Dawn, Ambassador Thylas watched the battle through the flickering screens of her damaged bridge. She could not believe what she was seeing. The pirates who had terrorized them for days were being destroyed in minutes. The predators had become prey. "What are they?" whispered Officer Venn. "What kind of species fights like that?" Thylas had no answer. She had called for help without truly believing help would come. She had broadcast on the forbidden frequency as a last desperate act. And now monsters from the quarantine zone were tearing apart the pirate fleet like it was nothing. She wondered if she had simply traded one death for another on the human carrier Defiance. Commander Jackson Okonkwo prepared his boarding team. He was a tall man with dark skin and kind eyes that turned hard as steel when combat began. He had led Marines for 15 years. He had never lost a soldier under his command. Today would not be the first time. "Listen up," he said to the 40 men and women gathered in the launch bay. "The civilian ship has multiple hull breaches. Atmosphere is thin. Gravity is low. We go in fast, we secure the survivors, and we get them out. The pirates on the main raider ship are secondary. Civilian lives come first. Understood?" "Yes, Commander," 40 voices replied as one. "Marines, move out." The boarding craft launched from the Defiance and crossed the void toward the crippled Valori vessel. Inside, the Marines checked their weapons and sealed their armor. They were trained for this kind of operation. They had practiced it hundreds of times, but this was different. This was first contact with an alien species. This was history being made in real time. Sergeant First Class Maria Santos led the first team through the breach in the Gentle Dawn's hull. She moved carefully in the low gravity, her boots finding purchase on surfaces that wanted to push her away. Her team followed in perfect silence. The interior of the ship was dark and cold. Emergency lights flickered weakly. Frost covered the walls. Santos could see her breath inside her helmet, a reminder of how close the life support was to complete failure. "Contact ahead," whispered Private Chun through the communication link. "Aliens, look scared." Santos moved forward and saw them. Valori. She recognized them from the briefing files. Tall and thin, with blue-gray skin and 4 slender arms. Large dark eyes that reflected the light of her helmet lamp. They were huddled together in a corridor, shaking with cold and fear. When they saw her, they cried out and pressed themselves against the wall. They expected death. They expected the monsters to finish what the pirates had started. Santos removed her helmet. The air was thin and cold, but she could breathe. She needed them to see her face. She needed them to see that she meant no harm. "It is okay," she said slowly, letting her translator do its work. "We are here to help you. You are safe now." The Valori stared at her. They saw a creature with only 2 arms, with soft skin that had no protection, with small eyes and strange flat teeth. They saw a Deathworlder, a being from a planet of nightmares. They also saw that she was smiling. One of the Valori, an older female, stepped forward hesitantly. You came? The signal reached you?" "We heard you calling," Santos said. "So we came. Now let us get you somewhere warm." The rescue operation took 4 hours. The Marines moved through the Gentle Dawn with careful efficiency, gathering survivors and guiding them to safety. Medical teams treated the wounded. Engineers worked to stabilize the failing systems. When Santos finally reached the bridge, Ambassador Thylas was waiting for her. The ambassador looked exhausted and afraid, but she stood with dignity despite her trembling limbs. "I am Ambassador Thylas," she said. "I sent the signal. I called you here." Santos nodded. "I know. My admiral would like to speak with you. But first, we need to get you and your people to safety." "Why?" Thylas asked suddenly. "Why did you come?" "The Council forbids you from leaving your space. You risk everything by being here. Why would you do this for strangers?" Santos thought about the question. She thought about Earth, her homeworld, where humans had spent thousands of years fighting and dying and learning hard lessons about survival. She thought about all the times in their history when people had been abandoned, when cries for help had gone unanswered. Because no one else was coming, she said simply. "And you needed someone." Thylas felt tears forming in her large, dark eyes. She had expected monsters. She had found something else entirely. Behind them, through the damaged windows of the bridge, the last pirate ship surrendered to the human fleet. The nightmare was over. A new chapter was about to begin. The message from the Galactic Council arrived while Admiral Chen was supervising the transfer of wounded Valori to the medical bay. She read it on her personal data screen, standing in a corridor that smelled of antiseptic and fear. The Council condemned humanity's actions in the strongest possible terms. They called it an invasion. They called it an act of war. They demanded that all human ships return immediately to the quarantine zone. They threatened severe consequences if their demands were not met. Chan read the message twice. Then she deleted it. "Admiral," said Commander Asay, approaching with a worried expression. "The Council broadcast is being repeated on all major frequencies. They are calling us invaders. They are telling the galaxy that we attacked without reason." "They are lying," Chun said calmly. "Of course they are lying. But most species will believe them. The Council controls the information networks. They control the story." Chun nodded slowly. She had expected this. The Council had spent decades building humanity's reputation as dangerous monsters. One rescue mission would not change that overnight. The powerful forces that wanted humanity contained would not give up easily. But Chun had learned something important during the rescue operation. Something that changed everything. She walked to the medical bay, where Ambassador Thylus was recovering from hypothermia and exhaustion. The Valori diplomat sat up weakly when Chun entered. Despite everything she had been through, her eyes were alert and sharp. "Admiral Chun," Thylus said, "I want to thank you again for saving us. I know what it cost you to come here. Ambassador, I need to ask you something." Chun sat down beside the medical bed. "Your ship was a research vessel. What exactly were you researching?" Thylus was quiet for a long moment. Then she spoke in a low voice. "We were studying financial patterns in the outer colonies. Trade routes. Resource allocations. We found something strange. Money was flowing to certain groups in ways that did not make sense. We traced the flows back to their source. And what did you find? The Council. The Galactic Council has been secretly funding pirate groups for decades. They use the pirates to keep the outer colonies weak and afraid. Colonies that are constantly under threat cannot organize, cannot resist, cannot question why the Council takes so much and gives so little back." Chun felt her stomach tighten. She had suspected something like this for years. Humanity had always wondered why the powerful Council tolerated pirate activity that hurt their own citizens. Now she knew the truth. "The pirates who attacked you," Chun said, "they were not random raiders." "No," Thylus shook her head. "They were sent specifically to silence us, to destroy our research before we could share it with anyone. We were not victims of bad luck. We were targets." Chun stood and walked to the window. Outside, the human fleet maintained its protective formation around the damaged Valori ship. In the distance, she could see the debris of the pirate vessels they had destroyed. "Ambassador, I have a proposal for you." Thylus looked at her cautiously. "What kind of proposal?" "You have evidence of Council corruption. Evidence that could shake the foundation of galactic politics. If this information were released to the public, it would change everything. The Council would deny it. They control the media. They would call it human propaganda. Maybe, but they cannot silence everyone. There are species out there who have suffered under the Council's neglect. Species who have watched their colonies burn while the Council debated jurisdiction. If they heard the truth from someone like you, a respected Valori ambassador, they might start to listen." Thylus considered this for a long time. She thought about her crew members who had died in the pirate attack. She thought about the children in the cryo-nursery who had almost been sold into slavery. She thought about all the other ships, all the other colonies, all the other innocent people who had been sacrificed to maintain the Council's power. "I will need access to your communication systems," she said finally. "And I will need to transmit on every open channel in known space." Chun smiled. "I can arrange that." The broadcast went out 3 hours later. Ambassador Thylas spoke directly to the galaxy. Her image transmitted to every planet, every station, every ship with a working receiver. She told them everything. The Council's secret funding of pirate groups. The deliberate targeting of her research vessel. The fact that the civilized galaxy had abandoned them to die. And then she told them who had actually saved them. When we called for help, the Council did not answer. The Confederacy did not answer. The hegemony did not answer. Only one species came to our rescue. The species that the Council calls monsters. The species that they locked away in quarantine because they were too afraid to let them participate in civilized space. Thylas paused and looked directly into the recording device. The humans are not monsters. They are the only ones who cared enough to save us. I have seen them with my own eyes. They risked everything to help strangers who had no claim on them. They fought and bled for people they had never met. This is not the behavior of dangerous animals. This is the behavior of heroes. The reaction was immediate and explosive. In the outer colonies, people who had long suffered from pirate attacks finally understood why help never came. On minor worlds that had been ignored by the Council for generations, citizens began to ask uncomfortable questions. Even on the core planets, where Council propaganda was strongest, voices began to rise in doubt. The Council tried to control the situation. They called the broadcast lies. They called Ambassador Thylas a traitor. They demanded that all species reject the human propaganda. But too many people had already listened. Too many minds had already started to question. In the quarantine zone, Admiral Chun received reports of the growing unrest with quiet satisfaction. She had not planned for this to happen. She had only wanted to save innocent lives. But sometimes doing the right thing had consequences beyond what anyone could predict. What happens now? Commander Asay asked. Chun looked at the stars through her window. Somewhere out there, the galaxy was changing. The old power structures were beginning to crack. And humanity, the feared Deathworlders, were at the center of it all. Now, Chun said, we see what kind of galaxy wants to emerge. She did not know exactly what was coming, but she knew one thing for certain. The quarantine was not going to last much longer. 3 years passed. 3 years of arguments and negotiations and slow, painful change. 3 years during which the galaxy transformed in ways nobody had predicted. The Galactic Council tried to maintain control. They tried to silence the critics and punish the rebels. But the truth that Ambassador Thylas had released could not be put back in its box. Species that had trusted the Council for generations began to look at their leaders with new eyes. Colonies that had suffered in silence began to demand answers. And through it all, humanity weighed. Admiral Chun retired from military service and became an ambassador herself. She spent those 3 years traveling to the outer colonies, meeting with leaders who had once feared her species, showing them that humans were not the monsters the Council had described. It was slow work. Decades of propaganda could not be undone overnight, but bit by bit, mind by mind, the fear began to fade. The breaking point came when 17 species refused to sign the Council's annual quarantine renewal. Without enough votes, the quarantine could not be legally maintained. The invisible wall that had kept humanity imprisoned for 50 years simply ceased to exist. The signing ceremony for the new compact took place on Earth, in a city called Geneva, on a cool autumn day when the leaves were turning gold and red. Delegations from 23 species gathered in a grand hall built specifically for the occasion. There were Valori and Rix and Valorians. There were species from the outer colonies who had never set foot on a core world before. There were former pirates who had abandoned their old lives when the Council funding dried up. And there were humans. Thousands of them lining the streets outside, watching on screens across the planet, witnessing the moment when their species finally joined the galactic community. Admiral Chun stood near the front of the hall, wearing civilian clothes for the first time in decades. Beside her stood Ambassador Thylas, who had become one of humanity's strongest advocates. They had formed an unlikely friendship over the past 3 years, the human warrior and the Valori diplomat, united by a shared belief in justice. "I never thought I would see this day," Thylas said quietly. "When I sent that distress signal, I expected to die. I never imagined it would lead here." Chun smiled. "Life is strange that way. Sometimes the worst moments lead to the best outcomes." The signing itself was simple. Representatives from each species came forward and added their marks to the document. The new compact was not complicated. It promised mutual defense between all signatories. It promised free movement and fair trade. It promised that no species would ever be quarantined or isolated simply because others feared them. It promised that when someone called for help, someone would answer. After the ceremony, there was a celebration in the gardens outside the hall. Chun walked through the crowd, watching beings from dozens of worlds mingle and talk and laugh together. A Valori child chased a human boy across the grass, both of them shrieking with joy. A group of Rix traders shared drinks with human merchants, discussing business opportunities in languages that their translators could barely keep up with. This was what the council had been afraid of. Chun realized. Not human violence, not human aggression. They had been afraid of human connection. They had known that once humanity was allowed to interact with other species, relationships would form. Friendships would grow. The carefully maintained divisions that kept the council in power would begin to break down. "Admiral Chun?" She turned to find a young human man approaching her. He was perhaps 25 years old, with nervous eyes and a formal suit that did not quite fit properly. "My name is James Torres. I am a reporter for the Earth Global Network. Could I ask you a few questions?" Chun nodded. "Of course. The galaxy has changed so much in the past 3 years. The quarantine is over. Humanity is finally free. Looking back at everything that happened, do you have any regrets about what you did?" Chun thought about the question carefully. She thought about the night when she had decided to answer the distress call. She thought about the risks she had taken, the law she had broken, the war she had almost started. "No regrets," she said finally. "I did what needed to be done. Anyone would have done the same." Torres shook his head. "With respect, Admiral, that is not true." The Council did not answer. The Confederacy did not answer. Dozens of species heard that distress call, and none of them moved. Only humanity responded. Why? What makes us different? Chun was quiet for a long moment. Then she looked out at the garden, at the children playing, at the diplomats talking, at the future taking shape before her eyes. "I do not know if we are different," she said slowly. "I think every species has the capacity for both good and evil. The Council species are not bad people. They just got lost somewhere along the way. They built systems that protected their comfort instead of protecting each other. They learned to look away from suffering because looking at it was too hard." She paused. "Humans learned a different lesson. We come from a world that tried to kill us every single day. We survived by working together, by protecting each other, by never leaving anyone behind. That lesson is built into our bones now. When we hear someone crying for help, we cannot ignore it. It is not that we are better than other species. It is just that we remember what it feels like to be alone and afraid. And we never want anyone else to feel that way." Torres wrote something in his notebook. "One more question, Admiral. What do you think the future holds? Where does humanity go from here?" Chun smiled. Behind her, Ambassador Thylas was introducing a group of Valori children to the wonders of ice cream. Across the garden, human soldiers were teaching Rix warriors a game called basketball. Somewhere in the crowd, She could hear music playing, a strange mix of Earth instruments and alien sounds that somehow worked together. "I do not know exactly what the future holds," Chine said. "But I know this. The galaxy is not alone anymore. When the next crisis comes, when the next distress call goes out, there will be someone ready to answer. That is what humanity offers. Not perfection, not domination, just a promise that we will always come when called." She looked up at the sky, at the stars that were now open to her species for the first time in 50 years. "Nobody gets left behind," she said. "That is our gift to the universe." In the years that followed, her words would be proven true again and again. When the swarm came, humanity led the defense. When the Great Collapse threatened the outer colonies, human ships brought supplies and engineers to rebuild. When the long dark fell across the galaxy, it was human lights that pushed back against the shadow, not because humans were monsters, but because they were exactly what the galaxy needed all along. And somewhere, on a small blue planet orbiting a yellow star, children learned the story of how their species had once been called Deathworlders, and how they had proven that name wrong.